Hello guys, this is Jerry speaking. Welcome to LJPCBM episode number 619, and today we're reacting to Purple Roads podcast episode number 66. Tad Stone's creative Darkwing Duck and Buzz Lightyear Starman from my childhood. So let's react to this. Begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
I'm Kerry Stinson, and my journey through life has been quite an adventure. For over 20 years, I played Barney the Dinosaur on tour, and 7 seasons of the hugely popular TV show, Barney and Friends. Now my journey is to bring together friends and guests from all over the entertainment world for inspiring and at times amusing behind-the-scenes conversation. I'm Kerry Stinson, and this is Purple Roads.
Okay. Wow.
Welcome to Purple Roads. My name is Kerry Stinson, and this is so great that you have joined us again this week. This is going to be a lot of fun. I don't think we've actually ever had an animator on this before, so I'm so excited that we have Tad Stones.
Wow.
He was with Disney for 30 years. You're going to know a lot of these projects he's worked on, and he's got so many titles. We'll just jump into that with him. Tad, how are you?
I'm good. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Yeah, titles. The titles started. My first title was a trainee, then in-betweener, because I started at Disney. I was in animation for about 40 years.
Wow.
But I started Disney in 1974.
Oh my God, 1974? When I watch a Buzz Lightyear Starman video, I was like, really? Continue on.
It's a training program where you and I knew a lot about animation just as a fan and had done it on my own, nothing elaborate, but I knew the basics, which really helped, because otherwise you'd have to learn animation while you're doing a test to see if you survive.
Right.
Wow.
Anyway, we did two 4-week tests or 2 8-week tests. I don't know. Mark Larson, one of Walt's 9 old men of animation, and he'd go over stuff and give you notes and all that. And I survived, and then you immediately become an in-betweener, because that was at features and all the productions was in the United States, unlike television, which parts overseas. And I was a terrible in-betweener. I almost got fired because of how bad my in-betweening was. My office mate was Ron Clemens, who people would now know as the director and writer on Little Mermaid and Aladdin and
just a few small
Princess and the Frog, Moana.
Wow.
Anyway, Ron would go in and correct my drawings, so I was probably creating more work for him. Luckily I survived that. I moved into, it was funny, this is back in the days of films and moviolas in our offices, and I would constantly do a personal test, because you got ahead by doing a personal test in your spare time, which they would review every once in a while. And I kept starting them and then say, I have a better idea, and then I'd do another. And one day I was looking at an old personal test, considering, should I go back into this and finish this up? There's some good stuff here.
Wow.
And the manager of the department, Ed Hansen, was walking by. I said, Ed, come in and look at this. Do you think I should show this? And he said, should I go back into this? And he said, no, just show it as is. That looks great, yeah. And there's a little pause. He goes, yeah, we had kind of given up on you. And it was like my heart stopped, because it was like, no one thought to mention this in like a 6-month review or something. So anyway, I showed it, and that bumped me up to assistant animator at the time. But I realized that I hadn't been showing stuff, and part of that was I really enjoyed creating what the characters did rather than making them do it. Now, the most magical part of animation to me is literally having a few pages of paper on your desk, and this 2D animation obviously, and flipping it with your fingers, because literally your drawings look like they're coming to life. and just you make a mark and suddenly it's an expression and all of that. That's magical. I love animation and doing it, but on a broader sense, it was story that I was drawn to. So I got a chance to shift into the story department. Sadly for me, this is back in the days when the credits of feature films were like 8 cards long, as opposed to today you'll have 8 minutes of credits. So not everybody got a credit. It was kind of by the whims of the people. And basically I did a bunch of story work on Fox and Hound. And then in the middle of production, Wooly Reitherman was taken off as the director, another one of the 90 Men, and the new group came in. And I did all my work for Wooly. And by then I was sent to what is now Imagineering to work on the Epcot Center and ride development. So I never got, credit on that one, which I kind of knew that's how things, fall until, as a joke, they gave a credit on Fox and Hound to Squeaks the Worm as himself. So I said, they gave a credit to an imaginary worm, and they didn't give me one who storyboarded 2 of these sequences. So anyway, that was that. I went to, just to move on real quick, my career.
No, but isn't it funny that when early in your career, I think title means a lot, right? But as you
go,
because you're trying to get started out.
Yeah, and plus little things like your pay is attached to your title. So as you move up, it's I have one animated scene in The Rescuers, a little picture, a little bit of Bernard Mouse sneaking across the desk of the villain's pawn shop, and then the cuckoo clock goes off and looks up at it. So I won't claim to fame, but at least I have something in there. But I didn't get any story credits. I went to Imagineering. I worked on, I got to work every day with Ward Kimball, another one of the 90 Men, classic. Ward was proudly in a book that Diane Disney Miller wrote, a biography of Walt. Walt called Ward a genius, and he gave dramatic readings of that paragraph to his family when it came out. Anyway, Ward was a crack up to work with. He shared many of his stories. So I was with him for 9 months on the Transportation Pavilion, the World of Motion.
Wow. Okay.
Now long gone. And then worked on the Space Pavilion. Got to meet George Lucas. And I talked about Star Wars with him over lunch. And then finally, the bulk of my work was on the Imagination Pavilion with Tony Baxter, who is, one of the top designers over at Imagineering. So that was great. Came back into live action TV to do these Epcot specials, which didn't happen for money reasons. For the network saying we don't want Epcot specials. And then beyond that, was going to go back into features. And then they had special projects. They said, okay, instead of going to features, do this special project. And it started out what eventually was put out as Sport Goofy Soccer Mania, I think it was called. After it had gone through, I originated it, did the original story, and then it went through many, many hands. Anyway, that group I worked with was more people in licensing. And when Michael Eisner came to the company, licensing was in a position, and Mark, whatever, the merch division, whatever it's called, they basically said, we can't grow our business without television. Otherwise, you make your same teacups, t-shirts, plush dolls for every feature, and then you have to wait for the new feature to come out. And it may seem weird now, but back then, Disney features only came out like once every 5 years, 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
But television is something they wanted to get into. So Michael started it at ABC Television. And so at the end of his first week, on Sunday, I was actually on vacation, and they called me up and said, would you mind going to Michael Eisner's house on Sunday? It's like, yeah, I'm going to turn that down to meet the new guy and all that.
Wow.
Anyway, that I was invited because of that group I had worked with on those special projects. They appreciated that I was, in a very short amount of time, creating stories, writing, and drawing, and that's the kind of guy they wanted there. Had a great meeting. TV animation got developed. I went back to fumbling around. There was a year and a half Disney should have gotten rid of me. I don't know why they're giving me a paycheck. Thankfully,
Man.
anyway, you know, I was actually considered leaving the company because I was just, I'm going, what am I doing here? I was thinking I was going to do the World Science Fiction Convention, something I started doing while I was working at Epcot or on the Epcot projects. And I thought, if I could make the same amount of money I'm making now, freelance storyboarding, I could like write science fiction short stories to feed my soul. It was my thinking at the time. Not that that's an easy thing, but I become friends with lots of science fiction writers over the course of the time. Anyway, I happened to see one of the guys who was at that first meeting, who is now running the department of TV animation, and he said, and I said, hey, do you do freelance storyboarding? Because I was totally ignorant. And he said, oh, yeah, I don't know that you want to do that. Why don't you come over and visit us? So I go over and visit their, and this is when it was real small. It was still in their first year. So I'm considered a first-year employee there. And he started to say, yeah, Ted may be coming over. Actually, I think he said, Ted, you'll be coming over here. I'm thinking in my head, it's like I didn't question him at the time. I'm going, well, that's a stuff. Anyway, ultimately, I did end up in TV animation. Technically, I started in management as a creative manager, but I kept on creating projects and quick log lines to pitch instead of working with outside writers, because I didn't know outside writers, and I was, again, too ignorant to even realize, oh, what you do is call agents, and agents have writers, and they send writers to you. And part of me just said, well, if people pitch ideas for shows, and we're not paying them, they come in and pitch a show idea, that's not right. And of course, that's how the business works. Right. You know, again, my stupidity worked for me. Ignorance.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, you just don't know. I mean, that's
exactly, yeah.
So still, and I disagree with with that. Continue on.
Good job.
Yeah. So Michael and Jeffrey Katzenberg had a Gong Show. For people who are too young to know, the Gong Show was a TV show with Chuck Barris where an act would come on and they'd have like 30 seconds to entertain, and after that 30 seconds, if they weren't good enough, they could be gonged. If they were good enough, then they got point scores and got a little trophy at the end of the show. So a Gong Show is basically the idea you have a little bit of time, and then it's like gong next. And one of the first meetings Features had with Michael and Jeffrey was a Gong Show where we just all went around the table. Ron Clemens, by the way, was sitting next to me, and he pitched a little thing called Little Mermaid. And he said, you guys just did that. It was a wonderful film. It was called Splash. It was a huge success. You know, move on. And Ron, who turned out to be a great leader, but is a quiet guy, was trying to say this is something different, and was like, no, pass. And they were going around the table again. But at the end, they never, you know, this was on a Saturday, of course. They never got around through everybody's ideas. So they said, hand in anything you wrote. And Ron made sure he handed in Little Mermaid stuff. And that's when they realized, oh, this is completely different. This is a whole different thing. And that began a little thing we call the golden age of animation, or the second golden age, whatever. Anyway, they had Gong shows, so we had one at several when I was at TV animation, and it was like, you know, they came to me and said, you're doing too much work. You're supposed to be bringing outside writers. I said, oh, okay. But after they left the room, I'm looking at the calendar. The Gong Show is this weekend. I have no time to get ideas. So we pitched like 22 log lines, which are like the old TV log, like TV guide, one line, a description of the show. So it would be like Trojan birds and legionnaire cats.
Wow.
It was like the Battle of Troy, but up in trees, like a Roadrunner coyote thing. Gong. You know, you had to be a clear statement. You get an idea if there's any interest. So anyway, we pitched, I think, 22, 23 shows. I think 18 of them were mine, of just one-liners, which again, not supposed to be my job, but that's what it was. And anyway, animation. Finally, I got a shot at moving from management, and this was kind of a short time, into gummy bears development, and that started me on the where I felt I belonged on the creative side, and went from gummies. And then my first show I developed my own is I developed it with Jim Magon, Chippendales Rescue Rangers, and then Jim
Wow.
became the guy who gave notes, and I was the one who did the show. And then after that, Darkwing Duck, and then a series of, because of my feature background, they always wanted me to do the feature spin-off shows. So it was Aladdin and Hercules and Buzz Lightyear, Star Command.
Yeah, which I mentioned before. Continue on.
The Team Atlantis, which was canceled when the movie, or put out of production when the movie didn't do well. And we put some of what we had done into a directed video. And then I was just developing things, and at a certain point, they said, "Hey, see that door? See what it looks like on the outside of it." So
wow.
After 30 years, I was like, I got a call from Michael Eisner before I left saying, "Hey, if there's anything I can do for you," and I'm thinking, of course, not fire me.
Wow.
After that, I thought of what I should have said is, I've worked at features, I've worked at Walt Disney Imagineering, I've designed rides, I've done this and this. It's a big company. Maybe there's someplace I could fit in, but I was too much of a company man, the guy who just took orders and said, "Oh, I understand, you need to get rid of me to cut overhead. I understand," it was like, come on.
Wow.
Anyway, after that, I had another 10 years of jumping around from different projects. Hellboy was a great project. I worked storyboard a little bit on Bob's Burgers, and my final show was actually on for Netflix, Army of Frogs, The Cool Party. And, so I got to go out with the cool kids, working on Netflix.
Well, it's so fascinating. I mean, all the things you just went through in so quickly. I want to start out with, because it was in my head, the Gong Show. Because we have a lot of people that want to get into this industry that watch this show. I mean, was it tough for you to get gonged all the time and keep coming up with ideas and go through that process?
When I was still in college, my, summer of freshman year, I got a job as a camp counselor. And I did the same job the following summer. And one of my things was to tell stories around the campfire. But my summer of my junior year, I said, and my dad had wanted to be a cartoonist. He ended up working for Carnation Company, because he came out of college right in the Depression. It's like, you take what job is out there, you get one. Because of the Carnation Company connection, their company picnic was at this new place called Disneyland each year. So I actually had the Disney connection. They had an Art of Animation exhibit. I bought the Art of Animation book by Bob Thomas that really was a great beginning to end description of how animation is done and how features are done. So that kept my connection there. But the summer of my junior year, I felt like, okay, this isn't the last summer before real life. So I'm going to take this summer and try to sell gag cartoons and just one panel cartoons. And I did that, and the closest I got is the Saturday Evening Post magazine, one of the last magazines to publish a lot of cartoons. Kept one for further submission and then rejected it, but at least it was like, they kept it for a while. And then the other thing was, I did a cartoon in a letter to my girlfriend at the time, and the exact same gag. It was a parent walking through Disneyland with a kid like floating above them because the kid's holding a helium balloon. So it was like parent on the ground, the kid floating in the balloon. The exact same gag appeared in a magazine, maybe the Post, I forget what. Not themed to Disneyland, just generic. But that was like, okay, ideas just like mine are getting out there. I never submitted to him, but it was just in a letter. But what that did was kind of burn new creative pathways in my brain to come up with ideas quickly and to just, here's an idea, because you trying to do that, you just come up with a lot of trash cartoon. And that really helped me in storyboarding, because when I started at features and was in the story department, we didn't have scripts to work from. There was a kind of an outline, and then you would develop a sequence like a fox and hound playing together. You'd say, okay, they can play hide and seek, they can go to the swimming hole, they can play Tarzan on the clothesline, whatever. And then Wooly and the directing animators would come in and they'd say, well, the Tarzan idea is stupid, forget that. Hey, the swimming hole's a lot of fun. That's classic for the country setting. Hide and seek is great because we're going to play them tracking and things like that. These aren't things I did, but this is the example. Then you would take those ideas and extend them out and maybe have another meeting where they like what they want and throw out what they don't. And then you'd start putting them in order and maybe putting some rough dialogue or a suggestion of a song or whatever. So again, it was about thinking visually and thinking quickly, knowing that a bunch of your work was going to get tossed. Famously, Walt was ruthless in that if people did like a real nice drawing and then they went in and got notes, they wanted to save that drawing even though it didn't fit in the new storyboard. Next time Walt came through on a meeting, and beautiful but wrong gag was still there, he'd just be casually talking about it and then crumple it in his hand as he went through, and just to say, get the message. So the idea was, the training was, you put out a lot of ideas, and it's how a writer's room works now in television. You pitch ideas. The point is, get ideas out there, let people react to ideas. No one idea is precious. So that was great mental training. So when I got to TV, it helped when I was writing scripts that I was thinking visually for the medium. And pitching those gong shows, it's like, no, I understand going in, if I pitch 18 shows, I do not expect to make 18 sales,
Exactly.
And nor should I, because even that, the Trojan Birds Legionnaire Cats idea was one of the things I pitched. And it's like, how would I have done a whole season of those? Rudder and Coyote are classic Chuck Jones masterpiece. But if you sit down and try to watch a lot of them in a row, it just drains you because it is the same thing over and over. Just the individual gags are different. There's not emotion to it. There's no ongoing story. So again, thankfully they knew that by instinct.
What got you into animation in the first place?
My dad would doodle in the side of newspapers, things like that. We got both the Los Angeles Times and the Herald Examiner, which was the two main papers. Examiner doesn't exist anymore, but those are the two main papers of Los Angeles, and both had comic pages. So I got to read all the comics out there. My dad had books on cartooning, famous artist cartooning course, which is a classic course that's just put out online. That broke down how comics are made and all that. I just love drawing. I love cartoons. So it was always something I wanted to do. And in high school, it's like, and then I started collecting comics right when Marvel was starting. So had a lot of those early issues, most of them actually. So it was always about art and not just, ironically, I'm trying to paint now, but back then it wasn't fine art. It was just like, no, cartoons, cartooning, gag cartoons, comic strips. That's what I was drawn to. Pardon the pun. Anyway, and again, that Disneyland connection, that animation feeling part of it. I lived in Burbank. My mom worked in a hospital across the street from, I was literally born across the street from the Disney studios. So there was always that connection, but in high school, I felt like, well, they have their guys. I'd love to work there, but the only place worth working in animation, from my little high school mind, was Disney. They were the only ones animating in full animation, telling stories. and they had their guys. Well, oddly, that was actually accurate when I was in high school, and it was in that time while I was in high school that management went to because Robinhood had made a lot of money in what was considered a lot of money in the day anyway. What are you doing to train new animators? And the guys looked at each other, train new ones? Because they thought,
Wow.
at one point, Roy Disney Sr. Was saying, we got enough cartoons, we just re-release them every 7 years. And Walt said, and Walt was all about Disneyland by that time. And Walt said, no, I started a company with these guys. Let's play it out till they're ready to retire. So they all expected to, like, sooner or later, turn into dust and blow away, I guess. I don't know, from the drawing board. But instead, they were saying, come up with a training program, and Eric Larson took that on, and also did a lot of work to develop what CalArts character animation eventually became. But it was just because my girlfriend, now my wife,
Wow.
had a roommate who was Tori Atencio, daughter of Ex Atencio, who was a classic layout man, story man, worked with Ward Kimball a lot.
Wow.
And then an Imagineer. So she knew about this training program. And she said, yeah, the guy in charge is named Donald Duckwall, which is not a hard name to remember. He claims he had the name first. Anyway, I called for information, and they assumed I was calling for an appointment. Well, I had only been an art major in my freshman year, and because my English teachers wanted me to switch to English because of my writing, they came up with a new major called Humanities, which sounded to me, again, ignorance helping me along, sounded like, oh, that's the best of both worlds. I do my writing and I do my art. And ironically, I switched to it, and I didn't do any more 2D artwork. I did sculpting, ceramics, jewelry making, and because I had one writing course I was supposed to take, and I had a conflict with I became a teacher's assistant in ceramics, and conflicted with that, I didn't take the course. So I managed to not take any more drawing or painting courses, and no writing courses at all, but I got through it. I graduated, and because of this connection I made, luckily the head of the art department took a sabbatical.
Wow.
And the new acting head was the ceramics teacher I was the assistant to, and he loved this. He could do the goofy yell and demonstrated it for me. And so he, even though I was an art major, he let me sit in on like drawing classes and things like that, so I quickly could build up a portfolio, because they didn't need a portfolio of commercial art, which I couldn't have done anyway. They wanted life drawings from action. And I had a meeting there. They looked at my stuff. I had some cartoon scripts. They said, well, we don't need to see this kind of stuff. We need to see the actual drawings. And they needed a few more. They said, we need more quick action poses. And like over the weekend, I watched TV, and this is before even videotape. So I was watching sports games and trying to capture action there, cheating by, guys in the hall had Sports Illustrated magazines. I'd say, oh, there's a good pose. I'll try to do a quick sketch of that. And I think partially what impressed them was that I'd come back immediately with a lot of drawings. This is what an animator has to do. And they liked the vitality of the sketches. My light drawing has always been weak, but the quick sketches were they liked. And that got me in, survived, and then we kind of talked you through what I'd done before. From the neat thing about features was, after doing training, you moved into in-betweening, but you're working with assistants and animators and learning the animation process by doing your job. So it wasn't like we still had classes of, like life drawing or caricatures, things like that they would do after hours. But you really learned on the job.
So you get into Disney. Is it just intimidating from the get-go, or do you realize
it was
all the history there?
it wasn't intimidating, and you're aware of the history, but it was so small. When I started at feature animation, the department was only 55 people, not counting the ink and pigment. So 50, that's why features took 5 years to do. There were just 55 guys and men and women, and some were brand new trainees and some had been there practically since the beginning. And you worked with them, they chatted with you as equals, and but obviously, most of my learning came through Ron Clemens, because Ron did a fantastic test of Cruella de Vil, which was shockingly good, because the review board, now Mark Davis, who did Cruella de Vil, was working in Imagineering at the time. So he didn't say this necessarily, although later on he said, "Oh, it's like pretty good, but she wouldn't do that," kind of thing. But they said, "This is good enough to be in a feature film," and it was without exaggeration. And so there's very little. Ron was then taken up by Frank Thomas and snatched up to be his assistant, work with him and develop with him. And he went on Fox and Hound and did the character Big Mama. And I think if he had actually gotten one of the human characters, like the Hunter, people would realize, like, this guy is a major animation force. But Big Mama it wasn't a showcase character. It should have been. It was Pearl Bailey, and she had a big role, but just the way things did and how the performance came out, it didn't make that big a thing. But Ron was a fantastic animator, but obviously made his mark at a higher level. So it was like, most of my learning came from Ron working with Frank, and he would come back from a meeting, and I would ask him questions, so he would repeat everything Frank had said to him. So I learned from Ron, and it helped Ron, he said, because by repeating it immediately, it cemented it in his mind. And then I moved to story, where I started working with the directors and the storymen, directly, and became, learned about animation through that. But yeah, it was like, they're just guys that you're working with. But it's like, yeah, that's the guy who animated the T-Rex in Fantasia. That's the guy, it's that kind of thing. So it's there. It seems like, oh, that's in the distance past. But then when you get older, you think of, no, that was only this many years before. So it's like recent history to them, and we're thinking of it as ancient history. I was born in 1952, and my dad had books of editorial cartoons about World War II, and I got very good at drawing Hitler cartoons. What a talent for a little kid. Anyway, it seemed like World War II was ancient history, and it was like, no, it was like 6 years before. That's just. You don't think of it that way. And similarly, you think of the beginnings of Disney Studios so much in the past, and it's like, no, these guys, did it. They weren't the Nine Old Men generally weren't the first line of animators. They were the second line that were trained by those first guys who built the studio. So it was there, and every once in a while, walking to work and saying, I can't believe I'm here. I mean, you're there for a while and you get jaded and stuff like that. And I was like, I had very few low moments like that.
Well, because you're talking, you mentioned these, you throw them out, and I understand it, but like Fox and Hound, my goodness, these are timeless. And I want to talk about the next part that you mentioned, which was Epcot. What was that like to go to this new direction here?
That was a lot of fun, because it was a different type of storytelling. And it was very interesting working with Tony Baxter, because he had his own feelings about story. Because there's always this, they would talk about Pirates of the Caribbean Live, and about the story, like, here is the mayor being dunked in a well, and his wife is saying, don't tell them, and they're asking, where's the gold, and they're basically drowning him, and she's upstairs saying, don't tell them, and then over here a guy's singing, and then this is happening and all that. And it's, and Tony pointed out, that's not how you watch the ride, because your head is not in a vice. People come in and they're going, oh, the guy's going into the well there, yeah. wow, look at this. Oh, those clouds are moving. Am I inside or outside? You can't
Wow.
control, where so it's a different way of thinking, and it's more about immersive environments. So that was exciting, and just working with a whole different level of creative people, a different type of, and the world was always hands-on. And again, ignorance, you don't know the rules. When I worked with Ward Kimball, I remember drawing a picture of a blacksmith, um, and he had this big jolly face and the expression of, because he saw the first automobile crash.
Wow.
That's what it was supposed to be, and it was a centerpiece of the World in Motion ride. And Blaine Gibson, the guy who had sculpted all those, the head sculptor, and had done all those pirates and things like that, came in and said, kind of sheepish, really, this is more caricatured than we can do. And, again, my training had always been, this is a starting point.
Wow.
Change it whatever you want. And actually, he came back, he called me in, a few weeks later and saying, look, he was so proud of this expression he had done. He had done a sculpture that, in his mind at least, pushed what you could do with the caricature and how far you could push those characters. And to me, it looked like it fit right in with everything else, which was the goal. But it made him go farther. And it was so funny, that relationship. And then we realized, Ward and I both, that, when Mark Davis was the key guy, if you changed anything, that drawing was law, so you had to go in and okay everything. So when, Ward and I are doing quick sketches and things like that, or something nice, or it's taken as if I were supposed to do this. It's like, no. And it's how I always work with my crew. It's like, no, you're the creative person that's supposed to take it to the next level. I'm giving you guideposts. And that, I gotta say, was the best thing about my career in animation, was working with all these creative guys, because the goal is I knew enough about everything to be dangerous. It's all working with these guys, and I got better and better as it went on, but it was like, you're supposed to hire people who are better than you in every, I'm the guy pushing them the direction I want and all that, but their actual execution talents, ideally, take things beyond that. And I remember just little tricks. There was in working in a Hellboy movie, we had a transition of a werewolf, and it was lit by firelight. And my director, Vic Cook, who had started with me as a storyboard artist on Darkwing, I think, this years later, he's one of the directors of the movies. And, he said, can I push this more red? And I'm looking at the background. I said, yeah. And they showed it, can we go this red? And I said, no, go more. And again, I had picked up enough working with other artists about Photoshop, and then brought my own temperament to it and all that.
Okay.
And I said, with Photoshop, of course, it's a digital painting, so you can just push sliders around. I said, no, push it more red. And the background artist pushed it just a little bit. I said, no, push it all the way. And he pushed it a little more. I said, let me. And I knew which buttons to push. I pushed all the way, and everybody goes, you can't do that. I said, yeah, now pull it back a little more. And they got to a place, that looks really good. That looks good. They said, great. They said, now look how far you are. And they go from back, what they thought was like, that's going to be so red. They were well past that. And it was just I had become dangerous enough to know and guide these guys, way more talented than I am, to say, go extreme and then pull back. Don't try to nudge up. You've got to get a fresh eye. It's like a painter looking at a painting in a mirror, or even upside down, because suddenly you see your basic shapes and values and all that with a fresh eye. So I love those little interchanges like that, or exchanges like that, and working with a group of writers coming up with new ideas. Somebody saying something to spark me, saying something that sparked somebody else. That was so great. When I was invited to visit by the new DuckTales crew, they were unsure of how I'd react, and I'm always open to change. It's like, no, I did my version of these characters. I know my Darkwing. You grew up with them, you know. You guys are all fans of the show. What are you going to create with it? And they did a different thing, but they understood the core. Specifically in Darkwing Duck, Frank Aragonis is the co-producer and head of story on that show. He said, no, Tad, when we talked about Darkwing, he said, Tad, we understand that Darkwing is the story of a father and a daughter and a launch pad. I said, yes, that is the heart of the show, this weird little trio, the team. And it was about the emotion, which is what I learned when I started interacting with fans for the first time.
Wow.
After 20 years, 25 years of having women especially break into tears or certainly get misty-eyed because they had a very rough family life with father issues. And it was the emotional connection of Darkwing Duck and his daughter Goslin, this goofy show, that was their anchor that got them through tough times. And that first convention was so amazing. I met several women like that, and then they met each other, they became great friends and all that. And it wasn't like we did it searching for that reaction, but we did do it intentionally. I said, make sure the characters, these two, always love each other, because Goslin was a very extreme cartoon character too. So she had to be very funny, and they had to be driving each other crazy, but you never questioned their love for you and affection for each other. That was intentional. I said, make sure they hug, make sure they touch, which was very cartoon.
Wow.
And little did I know it had this other effect on the audience. You know? So
it's amazing if you think
gratifying.
about. Well, again, it's amazing when you think about storytelling. You know, if you tell a good story, it really doesn't matter how it's delivered, right? Whether it's 2D or live action or all of those things, it's about that story.
I got to see a few of us got to see the rough reels of Toy Story, the original Toy Story.
Wow.
When part of it was still in storyboard, and some were these weird computer constructions with like lines coming out of faces, like a cloud around them.
Wow.
Because it was the technical stage and all that, but it, and then nothing was actual finished animation, but some was very close. And that movie worked at that rough stage. That was, you know, so impressive at the time. So yeah, it's not the tech, as much as all that technical stuff or how red to make a room or not helps tell the story or tells the story more effectively or more powerfully. It's still the story and the characters that you literally have to care about to really make a series something special.
I want to talk more about Darkwing Duck, because that obviously it's affected a lot of people. I mean, it's yeah. So you told a little bit, but kind of where did that come from? When you got into you've left Epcot, now you're doing TV and you've gone through all these processes.
It was that was the most. Here's a funny thing. I always like to put this information out there because wrong versions get out. Even when I read comments by Disney fans, and it happens to this day with all the Marvel movies, but fans are connecting dots to how they think, oh, well, this is why, and that's the motive of this, and this is why it happened. Not of the characters, of the behind the scenes, why things are developed. And it's like, there's no dots. You got your dots wrong, kind of thing. And that happens within, I told you, I kind of separated my crews from other concerns. There were people at the time who looked at Darkwing Duck and they said, oh, well, that was inspired by both Double O Duck, the DuckTales episode Launchpad, because originally that was its name, and the Masked Mallard episode where Scrooge was a superhero. And so I hadn't even seen that episode. But the story of Darkwing Duck's origin, the creation, is literally Jeffrey Katzenberg told me, Tad, because they always liked gimmicky names. Our goal was to create a good show, but if it had a clever and enticing title, they felt like you'd get a bigger sample audience that you can then deliver your great show to. So it's all about getting eyes on your work. Your work has to be good, but let's have this section. So the original, there was a pitch called Miami Mice by Ken Kuntz, David Weimers, and Miami Vice was out at the time. They loved the name. And they said, what are we going to do, a cartoon show about drugs? He said, no, it'll be about cheese. We did Miami Mice in development, quickly changed it to Metro Mice. It was a police station. And then we realized it's too limiting to be police. What kind of crimes can they do since we can't do all the violent stuff? We came up with the idea of Rescue Rangers with a character called Kit Colby, who was the centerpiece. And then it was a meeting where they said, we love the show, we don't like the main character. And then later on in the meeting when we're going down, because DuckTales was doing so well, what are other characters we can do? And they went down, Mickey, Goofy, Daisy, Pluto, and all that. And we got to Chip and Dale. It was Michael Eisner who said, put those chipmunks in that show. And Jeffrey, at the time they said, we love your show, but it's not a home run yet. And as soon as Michael said that, he said, home run, because it needed the star power. Well, that all came from a name, Metro Mice, that got it through the Gong Show. Well, there was an episode of DuckTales called Double O Duck, and Jeffrey thought that was a great title. He said, create a show, Double O Duck. Now, in that episode, Launchpad was the secret agent, and he said, can't be Launchpad, has to be a new creation, new character. I was not excited about it because it felt like just a James Bond parody thing, which is what I pitched. And Jeffrey felt exactly the same way. I'm not excited about this. It's just James Bond parody. Now, I realized recently that how lucky I was that the normal thing is I'll get somebody else to do it. Instead, Jeffrey said to me, do it over. I had a meeting, a lot of artwork was done. We still had the character in a mask and cape and a hat. I don't know why, to try to give it a secret identity to it, even though it was a spy thing. And called in a bunch of the guys who eventually would be my story editors working under me. And Dwayne Capizzi was a story editor. I think his first show he edited was Alf, the animated show. And Men in Black, Jackie Chan, and a lot of action things. But he said, boy, looking at the mask and the cape, and he's wearing a tuxedo, it feels more like an old pulp character like Green Hornet or The Shadow.
Wow.
And like, light bulb went on because I loved all that stuff. I hadn't grown up with it. I wasn't that old, but I knew it through fandom and paperback books and whatever. And that gave a new template. I thought of Doc Savage used to have a group of guys, of experts that worked with him, a chemist, an engineer, a communications guy, and all that. And I said that could be a different kind of a template to do secret agent stuff instead of Q and Moneypenny and all the standard stuff.
Wow.
It's just way too many characters as we developed it, way too many characters before you even got to where the villain's going to be, characters of the story. And that got pared down, but that got us into pulp adventures and then into comic book territory. And then we pitched it. It didn't really gel until we had Goslin, because it was the family unit at the center that gave it its heart. And Jeffrey approved it. They had Cloisonne pins. They started selling the show. And then Cubby Broccoli was the name of the producer of all those early James Bond films, like Goldfinger and the later ones. Somewhere in there, he got the rights. And they said, we own 00. It's not a thing, and you can't use it. So we had to come up with a new name. Jeffrey didn't care by that time because the show was selling, and he was happy with the way it was going. So we had a contest to name it because you work on a project, you're using the same name. My head can't get around that. And it was Alan Burnett, who was working at Disney at the time, who came up with the name Darkwing, which I thought was great. And I said, I'm going to add Duck to it because Darkwing is what he thinks he is, something dashing and adventurous sounding, and then Duck makes it just sound silly, so it's Darkwing Duck.
Wow.
Alan won $500, I think. There. And I think I want to say within a year after that, Alan left Disney and went to Warner Brothers, where he became the head of story on a little thing called The Animated Adventures of Batman. Or Batman, The Animated Adventures with Bruce Timm and all that. And my joke is, yeah, we warmed him up with the Dark Knight for the Dark Knight. Anyway, that's how that show, the genesis was really Jeffrey Katzenberg ordering me to develop the show, turned him in this character, had the heart, and then once we lost the name, that was the best thing, because then all those, even though spy stuff was still in there as kind of this funding, it's like I was released to do what I grew up with, which were basically DC comics of the Silver Age, which had this goofiest covers of, Jimmy Olsen as a giant turtle boy.
Wow.
Superman with a giant super evolved head, which they redid that story with Lois Lane and the Flash. And there was no internet at the time.
Yeah.
Or it was text-based, but actually we didn't go for that. Because right in Dark Wings when I got on the internet, it was before it was visual, it was all text-based. But, thankfully, because I couldn't look up old comic book covers easily or old stories. I'm glad I didn't, because either I would try to be too close to it, or more likely I'd say, "Ooh, it's been done. I can't do that," and it would keep me from doing stuff we ended up doing variations of. So that's kind of how Darkwing came to be. And again, fans are always putting together, "Oh, this happened. Like they thought the Liquidator was based on a character, Hydro Man, and I said that was after I stopped reading comics in that thing, so I didn't know that here. And I said, no, he's based on Sandman, because Spider-Man #4, he spots Sandman, and basically Sandman could go down a drain or anything as sand particles and things like that. And I think he stopped him in one of the stories by mixing cement and water into him, which is kind of how he stopped Liquidator in his first show. So I said, that's what he's based on. And then everybody said, oh, the character, the vegetable villain, Bushroot, is based on Poison Ivy. And I said, no, I can tell you specifically, he's based on Plant Man from Strange Tales magazine, which was a spin-off of Fantastic Four featuring the Human Torch. It was just a guy, curiously enough, in a big cloak and a big hat, who made plants move, like the cactus could throw needles and trees could swipe with their limbs, and that stuck with me as a little kid. And some things about Swamp Thing, who became eternal because you couldn't kill the plant. He just regrow, which is something we had fun with Bushroot. So again, fans go for this is obviously based on that, and they write it up, and suddenly it's in Wikipedia, and it's like not true at all, So, but that was such a fun show because it spoke to my childhood, and loved the characters, and my writers did a great job of it, because I created the show and wrote the Bible and guided all that. But then when you have writers take it and go farther, Doug Langdale is a writer, show creator now. He did Megavolt, or Electrical Villain, better than anyone. I just love the way Doug did it, in that Doug had him rob a jewelry store. And I said, well, I could come up with that idea. And it's like, but he wasn't after the jewels, he was after the light bulbs in the showcases. I said, I could get there. I could see that, because he was a goofy, crazy character. But then Doug had Megavolt run outside and say, "Be free, my children," and throw the light bulbs in the air, which then, of course, crashed to the ground and all break. I said, I wouldn't have come up with that. It was hilarious to me. So that was so much fun to see character designers. Sometimes I do a little sketch that they would pull off from, but just even incidental characters, seeing how they were designed and come to life, and the words they're putting them out. And then when you're recording shows, you have somebody as great as Jim Cummings doing the character of Darkwing. As soon as we had those recordings, you play them for the writers, and now they really hear the voice. It's not just the words; they're hearing the character in their heads. That makes the writing easier, and just it's a feedback loop. Even in recording the show, Ginny McSwain, Jim calls me Darkwing's dad. Ginny McSwain is our casting and voice director of the show. He's Darkwing's mom, in that he would do something, a unique sound, and then I remember watching it happen. In a following show, he'd do some other sound, and she'd say, no, 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 do that flat sound that you did before. And Darkwing had a way of, you doing this kind of thing, when you get smashed or something like that. And they did that in little ways and really helped create that character. Again, all those recordings went to the writers who could then put it into their scripts and all that.
That's
Darkwing changes went on. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating. We had Jonathan Freeman, who's Jafar, and I was asking him those questions as well.
Which I did react to it, by the way. Continue on.
Oh, it's fascinating, the combination between the animator, the writers, and the voice that put all of that together.
Yeah. Of course, I worked with Robin Williams on the second.
Whoopie-doo. Continue on.
Well, technically the third Aladdin film. But that was a case where Dan Castellaneta, who did the voice of Genie in the series, was fantastic, and an improv genius too. That actually was shipped out and being animated when management changed and Robin came back into the project, and they said, they wanted him to do the voice again, and Robin was fine, but he also got to see finished animation, which he wasn't locked to, but it gave him ideas. It made him real. And sometimes when Robin talked about the character of Genie, he would mix up what was in the original feature film, what was some of the gags from our film. But there was one sequence when Aladdin introduces his father, the King of Thieves, to Genie, where Genie reacted and really came up with a bunch of crazy stuff. And I thought, well, we're in good shape. Robin won't have to do too much. And it was the fact that we were in good shape that made him go even farther and just gave us tons of material, to the extent where the editors say, I don't know how to do this. I said, work with me. And I said, let's treat this almost not as a song, but think of it as a radio show or an audio track. So there's a fast-paced gag, and he slows down and says, Pocahontas, he had these, he had a gag where he turned Pocahontas jumping out instead of Geronimo. Once we had it sonically, so it was just fun to listen to, then I could give it to the storyboard people, because there was just so much material. That was hard not only to pick your favorite gags, but also to get them in an order and create a flow that was as crazy as Robin's performance.
Wow.
So it's a fantastic bit.
I know we were talking about this right before we started, that you started to do a comic convention and you're starting to really interact with the fans. What has that been like to hear from the fans and hear how much they love your work?
It was, again, I started with, I think 6 months after Ron Clements. So Ron and I shared an office, and Ron went on, as I mentioned, did Little Mermaid and Aladdin and, Hercules, Princess and the Frog, Treasure Planet, Moana, might be missing one, but a lot with John Buster.
Wow.
Anyway, he and I started 2 or 3 months before Glenn Keane, master animator, who just did a feature film for Netflix, Over the Moon, I think it's called. So Glenn, that was the little window. I was after Ron, before Glenn, but those guys were able to go into a theater and hear the reaction of the crowd and hear when people laughed or cried or whatever. They knew what they were doing. And even during production, they could have screenings and they can get that. We had just ourselves, and once it was on the air, you had ratings, but they were, again, we were going to do 65 episodes of Darkwing Duck.
Wow.
And that was all we were going to do. It didn't matter whether it was a ratings hit or a flop. That's how many shows you do, because that's basically 13 weeks worth of shows, and that's enough to, at the time, they felt they could just cycle forever. Darkwing had more episodes because in the middle of production, ABC expressed an interest to a show. And instead of taking episodes that were also going to show in syndication,
Wow.
it was like, no, we're going to take 13 episodes. So we got to do 13 more for syndication. And then ABC wanted 13 more for a second season. And that got us up to 91 episodes. But again, it wasn't a matter of ratings. It was just who expressed interest. Had that happened a few years later, they probably would have just used the same shows. And
Wow.
I got the double thing. And I forgot where I started with that.
Just we were talking about with the fans, being able to interact.
Oh, the fans. So anyway, so we had ratings, but that popularity did not. It wasn't like, oh, the fans love us, so we're getting more episodes. It was totally a business decision. So ratings didn't have that punch. So it wasn't until just when I retired, I had been to conventions before as a professional and a fan. So I'd appeared on panels, but this is the first time I was invited to be flown to Atlanta, put up in a hotel, and be a guest at a convention. In this case, MomoCon. So that was the first time I had that experience, and they gave me a table, and I had nothing to sell because Disney owns all my characters. So I did original art to have something to sell, and they were snapping that up. But the main thing is I got to interact with the fans, and I was shocked at the reaction where people would say, "Wait, you're the guy? You did that?" And it was fantastic. And like I believe I mentioned before, is the emotional connection with people. Again, people who volunteered, how important it was. And then I was talking to a vendor, and we had a nice conversation, and I went back. Just when you're walking around before it opens, you're just talking to different people, and I went back to my desk. And she came over and visited later, and she said, I never was a cartoon person. I never watched cartoons when I was growing up. And I'm thinking, weird thing to say for a guy in front of an animation poster, and then she said, except for Darkwing Duck. And I just watched that, really up through junior high, almost a high school.
Wow.
Over and over. And then I told her the story of, oh yeah, these women were really affected by it. They had rough childhoods, and it was an anchor for them. And she went, maybe that's why. And it was one of those things where, sorry I had a crappy childhood, but
wow,
glad I helped. So that really meant the thing. And then there were fans I started seeing at different conventions, and professional friends, the guys who were working on the Darkwing Duck comic book at the time, James Solani and Aaron and Ian, and then Amy Members, who is known, Ian Brill and Aaron. I'm blanking on Aaron's name. It's like, how often have I worked with that guy? Like, okay, well, I am 68 going on 69.
Oh, and your memory is amazing. I don't know.
Keep on wanting to say Aaron Burr.
Man.
Anyway, I also met Amy Memberson, who created the Disney
Pocket Princesses, and they're like the little version of Princess, totally a fan thing that I happen to know the people at Disney love. But I didn't realize this until Ralph Wrecks the Internet, or the second one, whatever it was. Princesses never interacted. Even when they were merchandised, like on the cover of the same game or something, they're always looking, and they're never looking at each other. Where Amy and her little fan thing postulates these little, should be kind of design characters where they interact as if they all live in the same cottage in the forest, and it's hilarious. She puts them out once a week. And Disney unofficially loved it because it's not a licensed thing. But then they had Amy do a Disney Princesses comic book. She wasn't able to put them together, but it's a series of comic strips of each of the characters with her same sensibilities. So I began going to conventions at the same time with them over and over. so it was great. And then I saw other Katie Cook is a fantastic artist who has an online web comic called Nothing Special, has done many Star Wars books and things like that, you know, and I keep it with these people online. You see them at conventions, and that was just fun for me as a retiree to get some free travel out of this. And the various conventions, just the fans were always incredible. But one of the last conventions I did was in Moscow, Russia, which
Wow.
I think is to an entire different level, because going up to it, they said, okay, you can do 4 hours of drawing and 4 hours of signing. You know, it just sounded wacky to me. And I said, no, I usually basically do these things at the same time, because people, you know, I'll get a crowd of 4 or 5 people standing at once, and it will be continuous, but you know, it's nothing big. And finally, I could tell they were being frustrated with me. And finally, I said, you know what, you're the experts. We'll set it up the way you want to. I had no clue, and the backstory is this, that Darkwing Duck and Chippendales Rescue Rangers and DuckTales were the first, and I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you know, right after that or about the same time. They were the first pieces of Western animation to be broadcast in Russia ever after the fall of the Iron Curtain.
Wow.
And they didn't even have animated series before then. They had, it sounded like miniseries or something with very minimal animation based often on Russian fairy tales, things like that. Suddenly they were getting this view of an outside world, a whole different reality, not just a chipmunk reality, just the kinds of stories we tell, and this was brand new to them.
Wow.
They were the only cartoons on. They were part of a thing called Disney Club, which was played on the weekends.
Wow.
So it was explained to me that every child of this generation watched those shows.
Wow.
And over, because they would then be taped and sold in little kiosks in the marketplace where parents would buy them, and kids, much like today, watch the same thing over and over again. When I got there, there was a huge line at my table, and it was tables. I had brought there my bubble comics, and they had set up 4 tables, you know, in a row, 3 people working at it, and me just, and this line of people that finally the last day I asked the guy to take my camera and take some pictures of it, and he took me. I didn't realize it went into the lobby and went around. There was a woman in a Batwoman outfit.
Wow.
And she, like, I had seen her. It was like a great professional costume. And she, like, dropped off some chocolates and then whisked away. And it was like, who is that person? Wanted to thank her.
Wow.
She finally ends up in line. And she claimed later that she had been in line 4 hours. I said, how is that possible? Unless that was part of lunch break, you know?
Wow.
Anyway, it was insane, the reaction. But because every kid watched that, they came to this convention and you know, getting their pictures taken. But and I don't charge for that sort of thing for signatures. So the company had done I had done a variant cover for one of their comics featuring ducks, and they printed up a bunch so I could sign things for people like that. But they sold every piece of artwork I had, including some like Inktober sketches that I had from previous years. And they were selling, and I didn't get a part of it. I said, guys, you flew me out here. You're putting me up. I don't need a piece of your profits. But I was just signing things constantly. But the reaction was just fantastic to have how much that meant to them. And the mind-blowing thing was, a comic writer was talking to me. He said, you have to understand, Darkwing was not a parody to us.
Exactly.
We had never had superhero comics. So when I say this is based on a crazy Superman comic that I remember, they had never seen that kind of thing. So not only do you have just the slapstick humor of Darkwing, you have these crazy adventure ideas with Chippendale 2 that are just like, well, it's like watching a bunch of Twilight Zones and then telling somebody stories and they've never seen Twilight Zone and they're amazed at the twists. Where for the rest of us, like, we'll say, yeah, it turns out they're eating.
Wow.
Right. it's a cookbook to serve man. Got it. You know, we know all that stuff, but it was all new to them. So I didn't get just credit for my show. I got credit for the giants whose shoulders I stood upon of comics and science fiction and television that I had grown up with. That was just a whole new perspective. But I wrote a long letter to all the crew that I had that I knew were on Facebook, to just saying when they were cheering me on, they were cheering you guys on. Because, yeah, I'm called the creator of Darkwing Duck, but and if it was a live action show and I was the showrunner, I would get all the money. That's how things work. If you do this kind of work, you are the creator and the showrunner. And I did that on Darkwing. But what you see on TV is the work of all those writers I've been talking about, and all the artists and the overseas animators, things like that. You know, that whole team that put together that, and any one of them had a big effect on the show and how it was, you know, how that was brought to life. Because I've always told people, I said, what's your favorite show episode? I can never. There's a couple that are standouts to me, but I can never pick one. I said, and during production, it's like, my answer would always be, do you mean in the script or the storyboard or in the final? Because it's like in the script, say, oh, this is my favorite script. But then it gets, so, you know, the storyboard team doesn't quite get it. And it's like, oh, I saw that being this type of gag, but we were turning out, production was so cramped, it wasn't like I could catch that type of stuff as it was being done. You took what you could and say, you know, corrected what you could, but it had to move on. Unlike, you know, shows now actually get the time to really fine tune each episode. Anyway, so there's at the script, at the storyboard team, and then of course, depending on which animation studio gets it, Disney TV animation in Australia was just starting. The connection was just starting about then. And when we got episodes of them, it was like the show was designed for them. They made every gag funnier and just fantastic, full animation. I like Disney short subjects and just classic stuff. But I said there's also a version beyond that, and that is the show the audience sees. And that's the reality. And it's not even the show you made or the show you think you made, it's the one they see. And my example of this is when I first came to Disney TV and the guys were in the middle of gummy bears. And there was a gag on screen, but they all laughed. And it was like, it wasn't funny to me. And I realized it was based on something from the Bible. And it said Grammy Gummy was a terrible cook. And I had to say to them, guys, Grammy Gummy is not a terrible cook. And they're saying, it's like I'm attacking their creator. No, what are you talking about? You never show her cooking except when she's making cookies for Cubby, who loves the cookies.
Wow.
So all I see is her baking and him loving her baking. That's not a terrible cook. So again, it was like, didn't matter what was in the Bible if you didn't do stories about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, you know. So that's that next version. That's what the fans see. So in Russia, that's different from American fans seeing it, because American fans have grown up with comic books and Twilight Zones and Star Trek and, you know, whatever else we might have played with. It was all new to them. So, you know, it is just, you know, I have to remind people, it's like, there's a show you think you're making, there's a show you actually made. Not necessarily the same thing.
I can't even thank you enough for being on, Tad. This has just been such a pleasure. It's
oh, thank you.
You're dropping all this history and
yeah,
I just love hearing about it all.
Oh, great. I'm glad you shared.
Well, thank you so much for being on.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you for watching Purple Roads. Remember to keep your eyes, ears, and your heart open, and you'll find your Purple Road. We'll see you next week.
So that was Purple Roads, episode number 66. Tad Stone's career of Darkwing Duck. I was so exhausted while I was reacting to this. I am so sorry, but I really want to do this in any way. But anyways, guys, that was episode of LJPCBM Reacts, episode number 619. Hope you enjoy it. Stay tuned for the next one. which is going to be LJPCBM episode 620, Purple Rose Podcast, episode 67. Till next time, so jokes, goodbye, peace out, baby. Good one, LJPCBM, you guys very soon. Till then, jokes it out. See ya.
Given unto me this life I'll never take for granted, and given all the time I failed to really understand it, I never sought to meet the maker of reality, the one who gave the life that which is always happening, but I tried all the time. I ask, why me? Why was I the one to see things as I do under the moonlight and the sun? Perception is the question, and the giver holds the key.